The first thing I remember is the sound of my bouquet hitting the church floor. Not the music, not the gasp from 200 guests, not even my husband Brandon shouting, "Dad, stop!" Just the dull, wet thump of white roses and eucalyptus on the marble aisle as I watched my father-in-law's hand connect with my mother-in-law's face. Linda's head snapped sideways. Her veil slid off one shoulder. For one impossible second, nobody moved. The pastor stood frozen beneath the stained glass window, one hand still open over the Bible. My bridesmaids clutched each other behind me. My father looked like he might climb over the front pew and kill someone. And I stood there in my wedding dress, holding the microphone that was supposed to be passed around for toasts later, staring at the man Brandon had spent his whole life calling the best dad in the world. Richard Coleman had just hit his wife in front of everyone we loved. The man who had spent months lecturing me about family values. The man who insisted our ceremony begin exactly at 4 because a respectable wedding runs on time. The man who told Brandon to choose a wife who knows how to keep a home. The man who hugged me at our rehearsal dinner and said, "You're a Coleman now. We protect our own." His knuckles were still red when he looked at me. And that was when I saw something in his expression that made my stomach turn colder than the church air conditioning ever could. He wasn't ashamed. He was scared. Not because he had struck Linda. Not because everyone had seen him do it. He was scared because, in the chaos, a thin cream envelope had slipped from Linda's purse and landed at my feet. My name was written across the front in Richard's handwriting. 3 weeks earlier, I would have picked it up and given it back to him without thinking. Instead, I bent down in my wedding gown, lifted it from the floor, and felt something hard inside. A key. A small silver key with a blue plastic tag that said, "Harbor Storage, Unit 214. Richard took one step toward me. "Give me that," he said. The whole church was silent enough that I could hear the fabric of his suit jacket shift. I looked at Brandon. His face had gone pale. Linda was holding one hand to her cheek, but her eyes were locked on the envelope as if it were a gun. "What is this?" I asked. Richard's mouth tightened. "It's private." Then Linda laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of a woman who had spent too many years swallowing words until they became poison. "No," she said, wiping at her cheek. "It isn't private anymore." That was the moment I understood my wedding day had never really belonged to me. It had been the stage Richard built to keep everyone close, smiling, obedient, and blind. But I didn't know that yet. 3 years before that church went quiet, I thought I was marrying into the kind of family people bragged about online. I was 28, living in a one-bedroom apartment outside Raleigh, North Carolina, and working as a project coordinator for a regional construction company. My life was not glamorous. I drove a 6-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking garage pillar. I bought generic coffee. I had a color-coded spreadsheet for my bills because student loans had taught me that panic was expensive. But I liked my life. I had a small balcony with 2 dying basil plants, a gray rescue cat named Olive, and a Saturday morning routine that involved bagels from the place on Hillsborough Street, and calling my younger sister Megan before she went to work at the hospital. Then I met Brandon. He was standing behind me in line at a hardware store, wearing paint-splattered jeans and holding a package of cabinet hinges. I was buying a smoke detector because mine had started chirping at 2 in the morning, and I had spent 40 minutes trying to silence it with a broom. "You look like you're planning a murder," he said. I turned around, annoyed, and said, "I'm planning to end one." He smiled. "Battery?" "Apparently. I just moved in and the landlord swore everything worked. That's landlord language for I stopped caring after the lease was signed." I laughed, and that was it. Brandon was easy to talk to in a way that made me suspicious at first. He worked as an estimator for his father's commercial roofing business, Coleman and Sons, though there was only one son. He had warm brown eyes, a crooked smile, and this habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he was nervous. He remembered details. He asked about my sister's night shifts. He sent me a photo of his disastrous attempt at making lasagna. He once drove 45 minutes after work because I mentioned casually that Olive had stopped eating and I was worried. He showed up at my apartment with cat food, a carrier, and the number of his cousin's veterinarian. "You didn't have to do all this," I told him. He looked embarrassed. "I know. I wanted to." That kind of kindness gets under your skin. By the time we had been together 6 months, I knew his family's names, their habits, and most of their arguments. Linda Coleman collected decorative seasonal towels and called everyone sweetheart, even when she was furious. Richard owned half the conversations in every room he entered. Brandon's younger sister, Ashley, was 31, divorced, and permanently offended that the world did not recognize her as the main character. The first time Brandon brought me to Sunday dinner, I spent 40 minutes sitting in my car beforehand, reapplying lipstick and telling myself not to be weird. Their house was in a quiet subdivision with brick mailboxes, perfect lawns, and an HOA that sent threatening letters over trash cans. The Colemans had lived there for almost 30 years. Their front porch had matching rocking chairs. Their kitchen smelled like roast chicken, lemon cleaner, and something sweet baking in the oven. Linda hugged me before I had both feet inside. "There she is," she said. "The famous Lauren." "I'm not famous," I told her. "Oh, honey, Brandon talks about you constantly." Brandon turned red. Ashley rolled her eyes so dramatically I almost laughed. Richard came in from the den carrying a glass of iced tea. He was tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man people trusted immediately because he had a deep voice and steady eye contact. He shook my hand like we were closing a business deal. "So, you're the project coordinator?" he said. "Yes." "Construction?" "Mostly commercial renovations." He nodded approvingly. "Good. You understand deadlines." At the time, I thought it was a strange thing to say to someone you had just met. But Richard had a way of making every interaction feel like an evaluation. He asked where I went to college, whether I rented or owned, how much travel my job required, whether I planned to keep working once babies entered the picture. Linda gave him a look. "Richard." "What?" he said. "I'm getting to know her." I smiled because that was what I did when I felt uncomfortable. I smoothed things over. I made people laugh. I told myself he was old-fashioned, not cruel. That became a pattern with Richard. At dinner, he carved the chicken while explaining how Brandon had been too soft as a child. He told stories about Brandon getting emotional at baseball games, Brandon refusing to join a fraternity, Brandon turning down a job in Atlanta because he didn't want to leave home. "Always had a conscience," Linda said quietly. Richard snorted. "Conscience doesn't pay a mortgage." Brandon lowered his eyes to his plate. I reached under the table and touched his knee. He looked at me, and the tightness in his face eased. On the drive home, he apologized. "My dad can be a lot," he said. "It's okay." "No, it's not always okay. I just mean, he thinks he's helping." I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. "Does he?" Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's built everything we have. The business, the house, the savings. Mom says he's stressed all the time. Ashley says he's controlling. I try not to get in the middle." I should have heard that sentence differently. I try not to get in the middle. But I was in love. And love makes you generous with other people's warning signs. It lets you paint over cracks because you are already imagining where the couch will go. A year later, Brandon proposed on the pier at Wrightsville Beach. It was early October, the kind of Carolina afternoon where the sky is too blue to look real. We had driven out for the weekend, stayed in a cheap rental with peeling white cabinets, and eaten fried shrimp from a paper basket while watching kids chase waves. He proposed at sunset. He had planned a speech, but halfway through it he started crying, which made me cry, which made a woman walking her dog cry. The ring was simple and beautiful. A round diamond in a thin gold band. I later found out he had saved for almost 10 months and refused financial help from Richard. That mattered more to me than the diamond. When we got back to Raleigh, Linda brought champagne to our apartment. Ashley came too, carrying a bottle of wine and a stack of bridal magazines she said she had borrowed from a friend. Richard arrived last. He looked at the ring, nodded once, and said, "Nice. You did all right." Brandon grinned. "Thanks, Dad." Then Richard turned to me and said, "A wedding is expensive. We'll handle it." I blinked. "Oh, that's generous, but we were planning—" "We'll handle it," he repeated. There was something final in his voice. Brandon squeezed my hand. Linda smiled too brightly. Ashley immediately began talking about venues. I should have said no. Instead, I said, "Thank you." At first, Richard's money felt like a blessing. He offered a budget of $45,000, which was more money than I had ever imagined spending on a single day. Brandon and I had been looking at small garden venues and thinking maybe 30 guests, a food truck, and cupcakes from a local bakery. Richard wanted a country club. Linda wanted a church ceremony. Ashley wanted a live band because a DJ is tacky. Every time I tried to suggest something smaller, Richard would wave it away. "This is my son's wedding," he said. "People will expect something proper." I told Brandon I didn't want his father spending that kind of money if it came with strings. Brandon kissed my forehead and said, "He'll complain no matter what. Let him do the one thing he enjoys." "And what's that?" "Being in charge." He said it like a joke. Our engagement should have been happy. In a lot of ways, it was. Brandon and I moved into a townhouse with a narrow kitchen and a tiny fenced patio where Olive liked to sit in the sun. We spent Sunday mornings painting sample squares on the walls and arguing over whether warm white was actually beige. We opened a joint savings account. We talked about getting a dog after the wedding. He made coffee every morning before I woke up. I packed his lunch when he had early sight visits. We watched old crime shows under a blanket and fell asleep halfway through every episode. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 in the morning and see him sleeping beside me, one hand resting near my hip, and I would feel so safe it almost hurt. That was the version of Brandon I loved, the version that held Olive when she needed antibiotics, the version that knew when I was overwhelmed without asking, the version that brought me a grilled cheese sandwich after I cried over a fight with Megan. My sister had never liked Richard. "You know he's paying for your wedding because he wants to own it, right?" she asked one night while helping me address invitations. "He's not owning anything. Lauren, he chose the venue. Because he offered. He chose the church. Linda wanted the church. He chose the guest list." I paused with a pen in my hand. "It's Brandon's wedding, too." Megan gave me a look. That is not what I said. She had always been protective of me. Our mom died when I was 19 and Megan was 16. After that, I became the one who handled things. Paperwork, insurance calls, grocery lists, the uncomfortable adult stuff our father was too sad to face. Megan saw my people-pleasing as a survival skill. I saw it as being reasonable. "You're looking for problems," I told her. "No," she said. "I'm noticing them." I hated that she might be right. Still, when Linda took me dress shopping, she cried when I came out in the gown I eventually chose. It was ivory satin with a fitted bodice and off-the-shoulder sleeves, elegant without being too dramatic. She pressed both hands over her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "Your mother would have loved seeing you in that." That broke me. My mother had been gone nearly a decade by then, but grief has no sense of timing. I stood on the little platform under those cruel fluorescent lights and cried into Linda's shoulder while the consultant pretended not to stare. For a while after that, I let myself believe Linda really loved me. Maybe she did, in her own way, but love can be tangled up with fear. I know that now. The first real warning came 2 months before the wedding. It was a Thursday evening. Brandon was out meeting a client, and I had stopped by the Coleman house to drop off some centerpieces Linda wanted to store in her dining room. I used the garage code she had given me, carried 2 boxes inside, and heard voices coming from the kitchen. Richard's voice was low and sharp. "I told you not to bring it up again." Linda said something I couldn't make out. Then Richard snapped, "You think she needs to know? You think Brandon can handle that?" I froze in the hallway, still holding a cardboard box against my chest. Linda's voice trembled. "It's not fair to him." "What isn't fair is you deciding you suddenly have a conscience after 29 years. The box slipped slightly in my arms. One of the glass candle holders clinked against another. The kitchen went silent. Richard appeared in the doorway. For half a second, his face was unguarded. His jaw was clenched. His eyes looked hard and empty. Nothing like the polished, confident man who handed out steaks at family cookouts. Then he smiled. "Lauren," he said, "you're early." Behind him, Linda stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Her face was pale. I forced a smile back. "I just wanted to drop these off before traffic got bad." Richard stepped toward me and took the box from my arms. "That's thoughtful," he said. "We were just discussing the florist." Linda looked at me, then away. And as Richard carried the centerpieces into the dining room, I noticed something dark purple blooming beneath the sleeve of her cardigan, just above her wrist. I wanted to ask Linda about it right then. I wanted to pull her aside, close the kitchen door, and say, "What happened to your arm?" But Richard was standing between us, smiling like he had just caught me sneaking a cookie. "Let me put these away," he said, lifting the box from my arms. Linda set her mug down too quickly. Coffee sloshed onto the counter. "You should get home before the rain starts," she told me. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were begging me to leave. So I left. I sat in my car in their driveway with the engine running and rain beginning to tick against the windshield. Through the kitchen window, I saw Richard turn toward Linda. I couldn't hear him, but I saw the way she flinched before he even raised his hand. That was the first time I admitted something was wrong. Not out loud, not even fully to myself, but the thought had entered the room, and once it was there, I couldn't make it leave. That night, I told Brandon about the bruise. We were in our townhouse kitchen, eating takeout Thai food from white cardboard containers because neither of us had the energy to cook. Olive was sitting under the table, staring at us with the confidence of an animal who believed all food belonged to her. "I saw something on your mom's wrist," I said carefully. "A bruise." Brandon stopped chewing. "What kind of bruise?" "Dark, like someone grabbed her hard." His face changed in that small, immediate way. People's faces change when they already know the answer but don't want to say it. "Maybe she bumped into something," he said. "Brandon. She's always doing things around the house, painting furniture, moving boxes, gardening." "Your dad was yelling at her." He set his fork down. "He yells. That is not normal." "I know it's not normal, Lauren. Then why are you acting like it is?" His shoulders tightened. For a second, I thought he might finally say it. I thought he might tell me Richard had hit her before, or that Ashley had seen something, or that there was some old family story everyone had agreed not to name. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck. "My parents have been married almost 30 years, he said. "They fight. It's ugly sometimes. That doesn't explain a hand-shaped bruise." He looked down at the table. And that silence felt worse than a lie. The next day, I called Linda from the parking garage outside my office. I had walked halfway to my car after work before I realized I was shaking too hard to drive. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay?" There was a pause. "Of course. I saw your arm." Another pause, longer this time. Then she gave a little laugh. "Oh, that. I caught it on the pantry door. Linda, it's nothing. I heard Richard yelling at you. He was frustrated about the florist. He thinks we're overpaying for arrangements." Was he frustrated enough to hurt you? The line went quiet. I could hear a television in the background. Some old game show. A bright audience laughing at something that clearly wasn't funny. Then Linda said, "You are a kind girl, Lauren. But this is not something you need to involve yourself in. I'm marrying your son. And that's exactly why you shouldn't." Her voice cracked on the last word. Before I could answer, the call ended. I stared at my phone until the screen went black. That weekend, Ashley came over to our townhouse to help with wedding decisions, which really meant she wanted to drink my wine and criticize everything I had already chosen. She arrived wearing expensive-looking boots and a denim jacket with rhinestones across the shoulders. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her mouth was already twisted into a judgmental expression before I opened the door all the way. "Cute place," she said, looking around. Smaller than I remembered. "Hi, Ashley." She dropped her purse onto the couch. "Do you have Pinot?" I handed her a glass because I was tired, and because I was still trying to earn the approval of people who had never once tried to earn mine. For 20 minutes, she complained about the seating chart. Then she complained about the band. Then she complained that I had chosen ivory napkins instead of champagne-colored ones. Finally, I said, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her phone. "Depends. Has Richard ever hurt Linda?" The wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. For a second, every sound in the room disappeared. Even Olive seemed to understand something had shifted. Ashley set the glass down. "Why would you ask me that?" I saw a bruise on her wrist. I heard them fighting. Ashley's face hardened, but not with surprise. With anger. "You need to stop snooping around things you don't understand." I wasn't snooping. I walked in. "And now you think you're going to save my mother?" "I think someone should ask if she's safe." Ashley stood so fast that wine spilled over the rim of her glass. "You have no idea what my family has dealt with," she said. "You've been here, what, a year and a half? You don't get to walk in and make everyone miserable because you saw one bruise. One bruise is enough." "No, it isn't. Not when you don't know what happened." "Then tell me what happened." She stared at me. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back so quickly I almost thought I had imagined it. Then she grabbed her purse. "You want some advice?" she said. "Don't make Brandon choose between you and his family. You will lose." The door slammed behind her. Brandon came home 40 minutes later and found me sitting on the kitchen floor with Olive in my lap. I had not moved. The takeout containers from the night before were still on the counter. One of the kitchen lights was flickering, and I remember thinking I should replace the bulb. That was the kind of thing my brain did when I was overwhelmed. It found a small, broken thing and focused on that instead. He crouched in front of me. "What happened?" "Your sister came over." His expression told me he already knew it was bad. "I asked her about Linda." Brandon sat back on his heels. "Lauren, don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm the problem." "I didn't say you were the problem." "You didn't have to." He stood up and walked to the sink. For a moment, he just stood there with both hands flat against the counter. Then he said, "Ashley called Dad." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because she was upset." Of course she was upset. I asked whether he hurt Mom. Brandon turned around. "You cannot go around accusing my father of abuse." "I didn't accuse him. I asked a question." "You cornered Ashley in our house. She came here to drink my wine and tell me my wedding napkins were ugly." "That's not the point." "No, the point is that your mother looked terrified." He looked exhausted. More than exhausted. He looked scared, but he was still defending the wrong person. "My dad said Linda fell in the garage," he said. I laughed once. It came out sharp and ugly. "Your dad said." "Why would he lie?" I stared at him. "Are you really asking me that?" His face went pale. Then he looked away. That was when I knew there were things Brandon had spent his whole life pretending not to see. The wedding planning got worse after that. Richard began calling me directly instead of going through Brandon or Linda. He wanted copies of vendor contracts. He wanted to know why the bakery deposit was higher than expected. He wanted to approve the final guest list, even though half the names were people I had never met from his business. One Tuesday morning, while I was in a meeting at work, he called 3 times in a row. By the time I stepped into the hallway to return the call, my palms were sweaty. "Lauren," he said, not bothering with hello. "The caterer invoice was sent to my office. I can ask them to resend it. You can do more than ask. You can make sure no one changes anything without clearing it with me. It's my wedding too." There was a quiet pause. Then he said, "It is my money." I stood in the hallway outside the conference room, staring at the beige office carpet. "I didn't ask you to spend $45,000. "No," he said. "You accepted it." The words landed like a slap. That night, I told Brandon I wanted to cut the budget and pay for whatever we could ourselves. I had $8,400 in savings. He had a little more. It would mean a smaller reception, fewer flowers, maybe losing the band Ashley had insisted on. I didn't care. "I don't want your father owning our day," I said. Brandon was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his work clothes. "He doesn't own it." "Then tell him we're scaling back." He didn't answer. "Brandon, we can't." "Why not?" His eyes lifted to mine, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten. Not anger, shame. "My dad already paid deposits," he said. "Okay, then we'll reimburse him over time." "It's not that simple." "Why isn't it simple?" He got up and paced toward the window. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed over a bright green lawn. Somebody was grilling. The whole world looked normal, and my life felt like it was quietly coming apart inside one room. Finally, Brandon said, "Dad has been having trouble with the business." I stared at him. "What kind of trouble?" "Cash flow. A few jobs ran over. Materials cost more than expected." "Then why is he throwing us a country club wedding?" He said he had it handled. That doesn't answer my question. He took out a loan. "For the wedding?" Brandon swallowed. "Not exactly." I felt cold all over. "Whose name is on the loan?" He didn't answer. I took one step toward him. "Brandon, whose name?" "My name is listed as a guarantor." For a second, I genuinely could not understand the words. "You guaranteed a business loan?" He said it was temporary. "How much?" He rubbed his face with both hands. $68,000. My knees gave out so fast I had to grab the dresser. He moved toward me, but I put up my hand. "Don't." "Lauren, I didn't know he was behind on payments." "You signed something for $68,000 and you didn't know?" He said it was standard. He said I was next in line to run the company someday. "You are not even a co-owner." "I know." "Did he tell you the wedding money came from that loan?" "He said the wedding was separate." "And you believed him?" His eyes filled, and I hated that I still wanted to comfort him. "I wanted to," he whispered. That sentence broke something in me. Not because he was weak, not because he had trusted his father, because I realized he had been trained to trust Richard even when every instinct told him not to. The next morning, I checked our mailbox before work. There was an envelope from a credit monitoring company addressed to Brandon. I knew I should not have opened it, but we had a joint savings account, a wedding in 3 weeks, and $68,000 hanging over our lives like a storm cloud. The letter said his credit score had dropped 42 points. There was a missed payment on a commercial loan. And beneath that, listed in smaller print, was an account I had never heard of. Coleman and Sons Equipment Line. Balance due, $71,384. I sat on the front steps in my robe, holding that letter while the morning traffic moved down our street. I felt stupid. Not ordinary stupid. Not, I forgot an appointment? Stupid. The kind of stupid that makes you question every smile someone ever gave you. Megan came over that night after I called her crying so hard she could barely understand me. She did not say, "I told you so." I will always love her for that. She brought grocery store soup, a bag of sourdough bread, and a folder from her car because Megan handled emotional crises the way I handled bills, with documents. After Brandon went to sleep on the couch, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the bruise, the yelling, Ashley's warning, Richard's calls, the loan, the wedding deposits, Brandon's face when he admitted he signed. Megan listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the folder. Inside were printouts from the county property records website. "I looked up the Coleman house," she said. "Why?" "Because you said Richard kept talking about money being tight." I looked down at the pages. The house was listed under both Richard and Linda's names. There was a home equity loan taken out 9 months earlier for $112,000. My throat tightened. Maybe they renovated. "They didn't," Megan said. "You've been there. Did they renovate?" "No." She slid another page toward me. "And there's a lien filed against Coleman and Sons from a supplier in Durham. $34,000. I stared at the number until it blurred. "So Richard is drowning," I whispered. Megan shook her head. "No. Richard is pulling everyone else underwater with him." The darkest moment came 2 days later. Linda called me while I was in the women's restroom at work. I almost didn't answer. I had spent the entire morning pretending I could still concentrate on construction schedules and vendor emails while my stomach twisted itself into knots. When I picked up, she was crying. "Can you meet me?" she asked. "Are you safe?" "I'm at the Harris Teeter on Glenwood. Please." I left work without telling anyone where I was going. I found Linda parked at the far end of the lot, inside her SUV. She was wearing sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy. When I got in, I saw why. The left side of her face was swollen, not badly enough that a stranger would immediately call the police, but badly enough that no one who loved her could pretend it was an accident. I started crying before I could stop myself. "Oh, Linda." "Please don't," she said. "I can't handle you crying." "Did he do this?" She took off her sunglasses. "Yes." The word was barely audible. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. "Call the police." "No." "Then I'll call them." "No." She grabbed my wrist so hard that I flinched. Her grip loosened immediately. "Please, you don't understand." "Then help me understand." She looked through the windshield at shoppers pushing carts through the rain. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Richard has been taking money from the business for years." My heart started pounding. For what? At first, gambling, sports bets, then online poker. Then he borrowed to cover it, and borrowed more to cover that. Does Brandon know? No. Does Ashley? She knows enough to be afraid. I thought of Ashley standing in my living room, furious and defensive, tears caught in her eyes. Linda wiped at her face. Richard used the house. He used my credit. He used business accounts. He told me he would fix it. And the loan Brandon guaranteed? Her mouth trembled. He needed a clean name. I felt sick. He used his son. He said it was temporary. That is what Brandon said. I know. Linda covered her face. I know. The car smelled like wet wool and peppermint gum. Somewhere nearby, a cart rattled over pavement. I remember every stupid little detail because my mind could not absorb the larger truth. Then Linda reached into her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a storage receipt. Harbor Storage, Unit 214. I made copies, she said. Bank statements, loan paperwork, the equipment line, everything I could find. Why? Because I was going to leave. The words hung between us. But you didn't. She looked down at her wedding ring. No, Why not? Her eyes filled again. Because he said if I left, he would make sure Brandon lost his job, his credit, everything. He said Ashley would never speak to me again. He said no one would believe me. I wanted to tell her he was wrong. But I had watched Brandon defend him. I had watched Ashley protect him. I had spent months smiling at Richard while he bought my wedding like he was buying silence. So I couldn't lie to her. Instead, I said, I believe you. Linda looked at me as if those 3 words were something solid enough to hold on to. Then she pushed the receipt into my hand. Don't go there yet, she said. Not unless something happens to me. My fingers closed around the paper. What does that mean? It means he notices everything. I looked at her swollen cheek, her trembling hands, the receipt in my palm. For the first time, I stopped thinking of the wedding as something I needed to survive. I started thinking of it as the one place Richard would expect all of us to be quiet. And I knew, with a certainty that scared me, I was done being quiet. Megan did not tell me to cancel the wedding. That surprised me. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her soup untouched, the storage receipt between us. I think you should, she said carefully. But I also think you need to do this safely. Richard has spent decades making everybody feel crazy for noticing what he does. So, what am I supposed to do? I asked. Walk into a storage unit like I'm in a crime show? No. She pulled out her phone. You call someone who knows what evidence is. The next morning, I called a domestic violence hotline from the parking lot behind my office. I expected someone to tell me to call the police immediately, which was what I wanted to hear, because it would mean there was a clear, simple thing to do. Instead, the woman on the line asked me whether Linda had somewhere safe to go, whether Richard had access to her phone, whether there were weapons in the house, and whether I knew if he had ever threatened Brandon or Ashley. Every question made the situation more real. I don't know, I admitted. That's okay, she said gently. You don't have to solve all of it today. But don't confront him alone. And if Linda has documents, make copies somewhere he cannot access. After work, Megan met me at Harbor Storage. We parked 2 rows away from Unit 214 and sat there for 10 minutes, watching rain slide down the windshield. I hate this, I said. I know. What if he finds out? Megan looked at me. Then he finds out you are not going to help him bury his family. My hands shook so badly I dropped the key twice before I got it into the lock. The unit smelled like dust, cardboard, and old furniture. There were plastic bins stacked against one wall, a broken recliner, a rolled-up rug, and a metal filing cabinet with a dented drawer. On top of it sat a banker's box marked Christmas decorations in Linda's neat handwriting. Inside were no decorations. There were copies of bank statements, loan agreements, credit card bills, casino withdrawal receipts, screenshots of sports betting transactions, and handwritten notes in Linda's handwriting. Dates, amounts, account numbers, threats Richard had made after fights. One note was dated 4 years earlier. Richard said, if I tell Brandon about the home equity loan, he will make Brandon responsible for the company debt. He said nobody will choose me over him. I had to sit down on the concrete floor. Megan found a folder beneath the papers. It contained a document with Brandon's signature on the commercial loan guarantee. It also contained an email printed from Richard's business account. The subject line read, Wedding Budget. In the email, Richard told his accountant to move $18,500 from the equipment line temporarily to cover wedding deposits, then replace it after the Durham supplier situation settles. My mouth went dry. The wedding was not a gift. It was stolen money disguised as generosity. Then Megan opened another envelope and her face changed. What? I asked. She handed me 3 pages. They were copies of checks written from a joint account Richard shared with Linda. More than $26,000 had been transferred to online betting companies over 18 months. The home equity loan was almost gone. The equipment line was maxed out. The supplier lien was real. Richard had not just put Brandon at risk, he had drained Linda's life, gambled against his own business, and used our wedding to make himself look successful while the ground disappeared beneath everyone else. Megan took photos of every document. We made copies at a shipping store across town. She kept one set in the locked file cabinet at the hospital where she worked. I put another in a folder at my office. The originals went back into the unit exactly where we found them. Then I called Linda from a gas station near the storage facility. When she answered, I said, "I went to Unit 214. She inhaled sharply. "You weren't supposed to." I found the wedding email, the betting records, the loan documents. For several seconds, all I heard was her breathing. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." "You do not need to apologize to me. I should have stopped him." "No," I said. "He should have stopped himself." She started crying. "I don't know how to leave," she said. I closed my eyes. "Then don't leave alone." The plan came together in pieces. Megan contacted a family law attorney through someone at the hospital. Linda met with her 2 days later under the excuse of getting her hair done. The attorney explained how to file for a protective order, how to freeze joint accounts, and how to document abuse without tipping Richard off too soon. Brandon was the hardest part. For 2 days, I barely spoke to him. He knew something had changed. He kept asking whether I was okay, whether I was still upset about the loan, whether we could just get through the wedding and deal with his father afterward. That phrase made me furious. Get through the wedding. As if the wedding were a tunnel we had to crawl through while Richard stood at the entrance holding a match. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I put the copied email and the loan guarantee on our kitchen table. Brandon came home late. He smelled like asphalt, sweat, and the lemon soap from the job site trailer. He saw the papers and stopped. "Where did you get those?" "From the storage unit your mother gave me." His face went white. "You went there?" "Yes." "Lauren, that was not your decision." I stared at him. "Your father used a business loan you guaranteed to fund our wedding. He said he would replace it. He can't replace it. He has no money. He has the business. The business has liens." Brandon gripped the back of a chair. "What else was in there?" "Proof he's been gambling. Proof he used your mother's credit. Notes about him threatening her. Proof he took $18,500 from the equipment line to pay deposits for our wedding." He looked at the floor, not shocked, not completely. "You knew about the gambling," I said. His silence answered before he did. "I knew he used to bet," he said finally. "Years ago. He promised he quit. You knew. I didn't know it was this bad. But you knew enough to sign for $68,000. His eyes filled. He said if I didn't help, the company would fold. "And what did you think would happen to your mother? To Ashley? To us? I thought I could fix it. You thought you could manage him." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I did what he wanted, he would calm down." That was the most honest thing he had ever said about Richard. And it was devastating. I loved Brandon. I still did, but love was no longer enough to make me feel safe beside him. "I'm not marrying you tomorrow unless you tell the truth," I said. He looked up sharply. "Lauren, I am not asking you to destroy your father. He did that himself. But I will not stand in a church and smile while your mother is terrified, and your father uses our marriage as a cover for his crimes. What do you want me to do?" Choose reality. He slept on the couch that night. The rehearsal dinner was tense in a way nobody else seemed to understand. Richard gave a toast about commitment and responsibility. He talked about how proud he was of Brandon, how grateful he was to welcome me into the family, how a strong household is built on loyalty. Every time he said loyalty, Linda flinched. I watched him from across the room. He was smiling, one hand wrapped around a whiskey glass, playing the role he had rehearsed for 30 years. Then he leaned close to me while everyone was taking pictures. "You look pale," he said. "I'm tired." "Wedding nerves?" Something like that. His smile thinned. Don't let Megan fill your head with nonsense. Your sister has always had an opinion about me. My blood went cold. You've been talking to Megan? I've known her since the engagement party. He took a sip of whiskey. I know when people are trying to make trouble. I forced myself not to react. He lowered his voice. Tomorrow is Brandon's day. Don't turn it into a spectacle because you think you understand adult problems. I looked directly at him. You should be very careful calling them adult problems. For the first time, his smile disappeared. The wedding morning arrived hot and bright, almost offensively beautiful. My bridesmaids fussed around me in the church dressing room. Someone played pop music too loudly from a phone. The florist brought in white roses. My father paced near the window in his suit, pretending he was not nervous. Megan stood beside me while the makeup artist finished my eyeliner. Linda is ready, she whispered. Her attorney has the emergency paperwork prepared. She's waiting for the right moment. Is she sure? She's scared, Megan said, but she's sure. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Brandon. I'm telling him after the ceremony, I swear. I stared at those words. After the ceremony. Again. I typed back, no, today, in front of witnesses. No more private promises. The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he wrote, okay. I wish I could say that made me feel better. It didn't. When the church doors opened and I started walking down the aisle, I saw Brandon waiting at the altar. He looked handsome and terrified. His eyes found mine, and for one soft, stupid second, I remembered the hardware store, Olive in the Carrier, Wrightsville Beach, coffee in our little townhouse. Then I saw Richard in the front pew, sitting beside Linda with one arm stretched along the back of her seat like he owned the air around her. And I knew nothing could go back. The ceremony began. The pastor said a few words about love, patience, and truth. That last word seemed to scrape through me. Then, just before we exchanged vows, Linda stood up. Her hands were trembling, but her voice carried through the church. I need to say something. Richard turned toward her so quickly that the motion looked violent even before he touched her. Sit down, he hissed. Linda did not. I can't do this anymore, she said. Richard has been stealing from our accounts. He has been gambling with the business. He has been threatening me, and he used Brandon's name to cover his debt. A ripple moved through the guests. Richard's business friends leaned forward. Ashley covered her mouth. Brandon stared at his mother like he had never seen her before. Richard rose from the pew. You are confused, he said. You're emotional. I'm done being scared of you. That was when he grabbed her arm. Linda tried to pull away. Richard's face changed. The polished mask vanished, and there was only rage underneath. Then he hit her. Everything after that happened exactly as my body remembered it. The bouquet falling, the stunned silence, Brandon shouting, my father moving forward, the cream envelope sliding out of Linda's purse. Richard saw me pick it up. Give me that, he said. I held the envelope against my dress. No. It's private. Linda pressed her hand to her cheek. Her eyes met mine. Open it, she said. I tore it open. Inside was the harbor storage key and a letter addressed to me. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Richard had written it days earlier. Lauren, if Linda creates trouble, you need to understand she is unstable. She has been under pressure and may say things that damage Brandon's future. I expect you to protect this family and keep these matters private. I read it aloud. Then I looked at him. You didn't ask me to protect this family, I said. You asked me to protect you from it. The church went silent again. Richard lunged toward me. Brandon stepped between us. It was the first time I had ever seen him stand up to his father without shrinking afterward. "Don't touch her," Brandon said. Richard's face twisted. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I've been doing," Brandon said. "I've been letting you scare everyone because it was easier than admitting I was scared too." Richard looked toward Ashley. "Tell him." Ashley was crying openly now. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Not this time." Megan had already called 911. My father stood beside Linda, his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping near his temple. The pastor quietly asked everyone to remain seated. Richard tried one last time. "This is a family matter," he said. Linda lowered her hand from her face. Her cheek was red, but her voice was steady. "No," she said. "It became everyone's business when you decided pain was your right." The police arrived before Richard could leave. He kept insisting it was an accident. He said Linda stumbled. He said the documents were misunderstood. He said I had manipulated Brandon because I wanted control of the company. But there were 200 people in that church. There were witnesses who saw him strike her. There were copies of financial records, loan documents, betting statements, the email about the $18,500, and Richard's own letter telling me to keep quiet. For once, he could not talk his way out of the room. He was arrested for assault that afternoon. The wedding did not happen. Not really. The guests drifted out in stunned groups. The band never played. The country club reception sat waiting with its expensive centerpieces, its champagne, its 3-tier cake, with our names written in gold. My bridesmaids helped me back into the dressing room. I sat in my gown on a folding chair while somebody brought me a bottle of water. Brandon came in 20 minutes later. He had taken off his jacket. His tie was crooked. He looked like someone had peeled his whole life open in public. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded because I had no energy left. "I should have believed you." "Yes," I said. "I should have protected my mom." "Yes." "I should have protected you." That was harder to answer. He crouched in front of me, the same way he had when Ashley left me crying on the kitchen floor months earlier. "I'm going to cooperate with the attorney," he said. "I'm going to get my name off anything I can. I'll testify if I have to." "You should." "I know." He looked at my wedding dress, then at the empty room. "Do you hate me?" I thought about lying to make it easier, but I was done making things easier for people who had hurt me. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I don't trust you enough to marry you." He closed his eyes. Then he nodded. "I understand." That was the price of the truth. Not just Richard's reputation, not just the wedding. Us. Linda stayed with Megan for the first week because Richard was released with conditions that kept him away from her and the house. Her attorney helped her file for divorce and a protective order. The accounts were frozen before Richard could drain what was left. Brandon hired his own attorney over the loan guarantee and resigned from Coleman and Sons. The business did not survive. The supplier lien, the unpaid debts, and the gambling losses were too much. Richard had spent years claiming he was holding everyone together, but the truth was that everyone else had been holding him up. Ashley started therapy. She sent me a message 3 months later that said, "I'm sorry I made you feel like asking questions was betrayal." I cried when I read it. Brandon moved into a small apartment near downtown Raleigh. We spoke sometimes, mostly about the legal mess and Linda. He paid down what he could from the loan after the attorneys negotiated the damage. He got a new estimator job with another company. He started therapy too. For a while, I wanted us to find our way back. But every time I imagined standing beside him again, I remembered how many chances he had to choose reality before the church went quiet. Love had been there. Courage had not. A year later, I sold the ivory wedding dress. Not because I hated it, but because I could not keep carrying a symbol of a future that had never been safe. I used the money to take Megan to Wrightsville Beach for a weekend. We ate fried shrimp from paper baskets and watched the sunset turn the water copper. Megan raised her soda and said, "To no more family secrets." I clinked my bottle against hers. To believing ourselves the first time something feels wrong. And when I think about Richard now, I do not remember the man who terrified a room full of people. I remember the moment his power broke, when the woman he had tried to silence stood up, and nobody looked away.